Hey everyone, welcome. A few weeks ago, I did a live stream on what you need to think about when you are moving with your goats. And after I did that, I realized that that needed to have a follow up, and that is what you do, what you need to do, what you need to know after you move with your goats. Typically in the summer and the fall, I start getting emails from people who moved to a new place with their goats and now they are having all kinds of problems. Sometimes these people have been raising goats for 10 or 12 years. They've suddenly had several goats die from worms and they don't understand why, because they're not doing anything different than they've been doing for the last 10 or 12 years. And what you need to know is that if you've had goats on a farm for a while, those goats have acclimated to the conditions on that farm. They've acclimated to the soil, to the forage, they've acclimated to the weather in your area. And the parasites that were a problem or were not a problem in your previous place may become a significant problem on your new farm. And that's one of the biggest changes that people see. You might also suddenly have different, you might have mineral deficiencies that you didn't have, or vice versa. So if your soil is different, like one thing, so many people contact me and say, our soil is deficient in selenium. And I always think, well, unless you live in the Dakotas, yep, it is. So, if somebody is in the Dakotas or like the border states right around them, they have tons of selenium in the soil in the Dakotas and going out into those states. But even the opposite edge of some of those states see more deficiency. So your soil is going to be different. Sometimes when you move from one place to another, your forage is going to be different. Sometimes I get questions from people who live on the West Coast about specific plants, which I have zero experience with because we don't have those plants in Illinois. So you might have problems with some plants or forage when you move to a new place. One of the things that Tammy, who helps me answer questions on social media, she originally got her goats when she lived on a farm that was very wooded. And so she was in Texas, never had a parasite problem ever on her first farm because her goats had lots of browse. And so they were eating up here. There's an old saying, goats should never eat below their knees. And they bought a new farm that did not have all that browse. It had a lot of grass. And all of a sudden she was losing goats to parasites because the goats were eating off the ground. And she didn't understand why she was suddenly having parasite problems. And it's because the worms, your goats have worms and they get pooped out. And then the eggs get pooped out, and then the eggs hatch on your pasture and turn into larvae, and they mature to the stage that they are infective and they are on the grass. And when your goats eat grass, they are getting that larva. Now the larvae don't have a means of locomotion. They can't walk or swim, but they can float up on wet grass. So this is why they say that you don't want goats eating grass that's any shorter than 4 inches. If the larva could crawl, they'd crawl all the way, to the top. But they really haven't found them above 4 inches because that's about as high as they can float on wet grass. But if if you've come from a place where you have never had, your goats haven't been eating a lot of grass, then you would not have parasite problems. I've gotten contacted by people who have moved from like the mountains of California and Utah and stuff out to the southeastern United States, like Georgia, which is like worm heaven. Barber Pole Central, worms in the southeast United States thrive because they have the absolute most primo conditions. Dehydration is their enemy, and they need grass to infect goats. And so the goats poop out the eggs on the pasture in the southeastern U.S. They get lots of rain. the larvae wind up on the grass, the goats eat the grass. And so the goats just get in this infective cycle where into the point that they consume so much larva that now they are overloaded. And so this is basically the problem that a lot of people have when they move from one property to another, is that they are moving from a place that had no worm problems to a place that is worm central. And this is why I always say you can't just copy what somebody else did. And it really frustrates the heck out of me that there are people out west who have websites where they say there's no such thing as dewormer resistance. I've never had a goat die from worms, because they have no clue that they are living in the best place in the country when it comes to worms, because their goats poop out worm eggs and they dehydrate on the pasture. It's because it's not even a pasture. It's, in the sand or on the rocks or whatever. They don't get they don't get a lot of rain. And so even if the eggs hatch, the larvae dry out. Basically dehydration is what kills worm larvae. And so if you're getting rain every day or even every other day, larvae can survive on pasture for months. So that's why rotational grazing is absolutely essential when you live in a place that has a lot of rain, because the larvae can live for so long. So if you are going to be moving within the next few months, these are some things to keep in mind. Check out see if the soil is different in the place that you are moving to. You might need to switch up your minerals. So for example, like if you live in the Dakotas, your goats would probably do fine on Mana Pro. Mana Pro has I do not recommend Mana Pro for breeding animals, because it has 1/4 as much selenium in it as Purina and Sweet Licks. So, for people in most of the United States, if you feed Mana Pro to your breeding animals, you're going to have fertility problems. You could have retained placentas in your does. You could have kids that are weak at birth because they're selenium deficient. So, if you've got breeding goats in most parts of the US, you really need to be feeding a mineral that's got 50 ppm selenium in it, like Purina, loose goat minerals, or Sweet Licks meat maker. But if you're in the Dakotas, where they have a lot of selenium in the soil, then you could get away with feeding Mana Pro, because there's so much selenium in the soil there. And also your forage is different. So you have to keep in mind, how is your weather going to be different? How is the forage going to be different? And the biggest thing that is going to be affected is parasites, but you might also have some mineral changes that need to be made if you are moving from one place to another. And I talk about all of it. This is why I have like courses, because I can't just tell you like, oh, feed your goats XYZ and it'll all be good. Because it varies from one part of the country to another. It can even vary when you go a few miles. I always use the example of this friend I had for 20 years. She lived 4 miles away from me. And if I had goats dying from copper deficiency in the early days, and I wound up having to supplement a lot. If she had supplemented her goats with copper the way I did, she would have killed them with copper toxicity, because I had well water, she had city water. So that right there is like, you can't just copy somebody else's management. And I know people who have killed their goats with injections of multimin, because they heard so-and-so's goats are like doing great and she gives them multimin injections. So they went out and got multimin from their vet, unfortunately, and had several goats die as a result of that. So, and they did liver tests and kidney tests, and the goats did indeed die, actually from both copper and selenium toxicity, because they did not need to be supplemented with those minerals at that level. So basically, if you move to a new farm, it is like you're starting over again. Everything, don't expect everything to keep working the way that it did on your old farm. Even if it's 4 miles away, or if it's in another state in a completely different ecosystem. If you're in, this is the kind of thing we talk about in our Goats 365 meetings, that when people move or get new goats or whatever, we can go through all of the nitty gritty of exactly what your circumstances are and try to help you become the expert on your goats on your farm, on the farm you're living at right now. So hope this has been helpful. Talk to you guys again soon. Bye for now.